Everyone is welcome to today's meeting of the Public Accounts Committee, and I am obliged to ask you to turn off your mobile phones and your electronic devices, with the exception of members' tablet devices which contain the electronic committee meeting packs. It is not sufficient to put mobiles on silent mode as they continue to interfere with the Assembly recording. The session has been recorded in video and audio and can be accessed via on-stream streaming either on the Assembly website or on Democracy Live. Members, I have received an apology from the chairperson, who was here this morning and had to go home because she's ill, and Trevor Clark. Are members aware of any other apologies?
Mr. Copeland will be returning. He was here earlier, but he will be coming back.
Thank you. Members, the minutes of the last meeting are at page 7 of your electronic packs. Blue pack for those not using the electronic system. Are members content for these to be signed into the record?
Agreed.
Agreed. We do it now. You have to sign it now. Later on. Okay. We move on to agenda item 3. No, sorry, we're moving on to agenda item 4, matters arising. I have correspondence from the accounting officer of DSD. Members tabled as a response from the accounting officer of DSD in relation to information requested at the evidence session on our inquiry into tackling social housing tenancy fraud in Northern Ireland. This correspondence includes details of the tenancy strategy used by Apex Housing Association. Members, are you content to note this information and that it be considered when drafting the committee's report on this inquiry?
I agree.
Thank you. We now move on to agenda item 4, correspondence. Members, you'll be pleased to know there are no new items of correspondence for consideration today.
Hooray.
We move on to agenda item 5, inquiry into the future impact of borrowing and private finance commitments and Belfast Metropolitan College's Titanic Quarter PPP project, the evidence session. Members will now turn our attention to the evidence session for the future impact of borrowing and private finance commitments element of this inquiry. Do any members wish to declare an interest in these matters? Members, today we have Mr Jack Lavery with us for the first time in his new role as Treasury Officer of Accounts. Jack, on behalf of the committee, I wish to welcome you and wish you every success as DOA. We look forward to working with you. We also have today Dr Mark Brown and Mr Stephen Pover, accounting officers for OFM, DFM and DFP respectively. Also in attendance are Brett Hammond, Chief Executive of the Strategic Investment Board, and Mike Brennan of DFP, Budget Director of DFP. Thank you for joining us today. You are very welcome to the committee. Members, you will find biographies for all the witnesses here today on pages 13-16 of your electronic pack. Not indeed, I'm sure you need to refer to them. The Audit Office previously reported on the lack of transparency around these commitments. Why does there continue to be a lack of transparency in relation to the PFI and the RRI reporting arrangements to the Assembly and its committee?
Well, perhaps, Chair, I'll start off in responding to the question. I think there are a number of things that we do in terms of making information on PFI available, both to the Assembly and to ministers. The investment strategy for Northern Ireland that is published contains within it an estimate of the amount of alternative finance or private finance that will be used over the course of that period of time, in this case to 2021. And that is debated in the Assembly and goes out for public consultation. In addition, there's information which OFM DFM collects and makes available to the Treasury website, which is open to the public, which sets out in detail all the information on every individual PFI contract. It includes a range of information from the start date, the end date, the unity charges that are paid each year, those contractors who have an equity interest in the particular project involved. I'll say that is available and is on the Treasury website. There's also an annual update on the investment strategy, which is provided to the Assembly in terms of projects which have been taken forward and projects which are coming in the future, and that would also include reference to alternative finance or PFI. So there's a range of ways in which there is information provided, but we accept that the report identifies that there could be an opportunity to make that information more widely available. From an OFM DFM perspective, we have been looking at the information provided on the Treasury website, and we would be intending to take the Northern Ireland projects there and make that information available on the OFM DFM website so that is more readily accessible to the Assembly and to others.
Maybe if we could refer to the website. According to the website you've just mentioned, there are only 3 PFI operational in NI costing approximately £60 million. This is significantly lower than reported in the Audit Office report. Clearly there has been a breakdown in the system for recording PFI information on the Her Majesty's Treasury database. Please explain what went wrong and why was incorrect information provided in response to an Assembly question.
Well, I'm not sure about the response to the Assembly question, Chair, but I was on the website this morning and there were many more than I can't remember the figure you said, 4 or 5. There were 35 projects listed as currently currently underway. So it may be that there are different elements to that website. I don't know whether someone has looked at a different part of the website, but certainly that information is there and is available for those projects. And I checked it only this morning myself.
Well, I'm sure members will take you up on that. I hope it wasn't just this morning before coming to this meeting that you were on the website. That is something that's checked regularly.
It's something that my staff would check regularly. I personally went into this morning just to look through the detail in anticipation of some questions might come up.
Perhaps it might be appropriate at this stage to put in context just what we're talking about, because when we speak about billions and billions, we're well above the heads of the ordinary taxpayer and ratepayers who contribute generously. The Audit Office report shows annual costs of £250 million each year for PFI contracts, which have committed the Executive to over £7 billion in future years. Now, I'm sure while members are worried about welfare reform and all sorts of things, that's a horrendous figure. Reinvestment and reform initiative borrowings cost £100 million each year, an estimated interest of £1.3 billion in future years. Now, to future generations, that must be real scary, I would have thought. This is the first time we've seen the figures. Do you not think that these figures should be more transparent to us as elected representatives?
Maybe make a few comments on the PFI. Steve might want to say something about the RRI.
I must insist that I get a direct answer to the question I've just put to you.
Yes, the information on the amount of money that is spent on the project is on the HMT database, which OFM DFM collects from all the Northern Ireland departments, and the information is there for every project. It sets out the unity charge for every year, right beyond the life of the project. In terms of the numbers being large, The numbers are large because they are the amount that would be spent over the next 25 to 30 years. It would be a little like taking all your mortgage payments and multiplying them up into one lump sum and looking at how much you might have to spend on your mortgage over the next number of years. You will inevitably get a very large figure when you take amounts for a long period ahead and roll them up into a single figure, and that's why the figure appears large. I think the key point to make in this is that all of these projects have been subject to business cases. All of those business cases have demonstrated that the PFI approach, compared with the conventional option, demonstrated value for money. So while the figures may be large, taken over that long period, nevertheless they have been demonstrated through the business case process to be value for money.
So really, Dr. Brown, you're telling me that you're open and transparent and everything's in place and there's really no reason for complaining about accountability, transparency of the process to this Northern Ireland Assembly.
Well, I think, Chair, what I'm saying is that there's information available in a variety of forms. I think that information in response to the report and the comments that are being made could be better signposted so that members could find and get that information more quickly when they have an interest in this particular area, and that's something that we will look at. And I've already indicated that certainly from our perspective we will be putting the relevant Northern Ireland information on the OFM DFM website, and we'll put a link to the SIB website and make sure that when someone's looking for that kind of information it's available readily in each project.
But, Dr. Brown, just to get it clear and maybe for the record, we're not now totally dependent on a website for information to the Northern Ireland Assembly on how much debt has been accumulated for the next 30 years for future generations.
The information, as I say, on the individual projects is on the website. The information on PFI would be contained in each departmental account. There's also information on RRI and the various borrowings there in the public information and expenditure
Maybe we could just
account.
maybe stop you there and give you a wee bit of history. In a response from OFMDF to one of this committee's questions in relation to the original Reinvestment and Reform Initiative report back in 2008, it was stated, and I quote, that ministers were considering options for reporting PFI commitments to the Assembly. According to the CNAG's report, there is still no central collection of PFI costs and commitments or dissemination directly to Northern Ireland. What options, if any, have been proposed by your department for consideration by ministers, and what was the outcome of those considerations? And we've already heard about your website, but please elaborate beyond that.
So, say in terms of PFI, the main source at a high level is the investment strategy, which sets out the amount of funding that we put towards investment over the longer term, and within that gives an indication of the amount of private expenditure which is planned according to the 7 pillars there and by department. So that gives the broad high level amount. As at the detailed amount, there is the information on every individual project which is provided by the individual website, and I've indicated how we would seek to improve the signposting of that. There is also reporting on PFI in individual departmental accounts. So I think the issue is one that the information is there, but perhaps isn't gathered in one place or isn't signposted as well as it might be for members to get the information that they actually require. And we're happy to look at how we can better signpost in that regard.
Now we can move on now to members from questions from individual members. And Paul.
It's just really to come back and appreciate, Chair, that you have taken it down a route. It's about the reporting mechanism, and in paragraph 210 of the report, there is mention made the budget review group, having sight of a lot of this information, but they haven't necessarily reported that through, and you don't think it would be important that would actually be reported through to committees that have impact, that it's going to impact upon. Some departments are making spend, allocating their money, and some of them are not totally across the case of what PFI contracts they're already committed to out of their budgets. And we went through an exercise yesterday, which is the budgets and dealing with the budget for the next year, it's somewhat difficult to extrapolate out some of the detail of the PFI commitments within the headings that appear. Now, maybe that's easily explained, but it didn't appear to be quite easy to pull out of it where those commitments are put to and what headings they're put in under within that budget process. So I think, is there not a merit in actually having some reporting mechanism to ensure that committees are made aware and the Assembly are made aware of all of the commitments that are put into for PFI contracts?
Well, so in relation to the budget review group, it's a subgroup of the executive, and many of the issues that they consider there would be policy and confidence, and it wouldn't be appropriate for the detail of all of those papers to be made available. But the reporting that there is around PFI, as I say, relates to the ISNI when it's first developed, the annual update that is provided. There's an update every year on the investment strategy. There will be 6 monthly updates to the Committee of OFM, DFM, and there's the individual information that I referred to before, which is on the website. And I think more can be done just to make apparent where that information is available. Let's say there is individual information as well in individual departmental accounts, which committees would have access to.
Yeah, each committee will have access to their own departmental accounts. So whenever it comes through to the DFP, we get headings which are quite appreciate we cannot maybe go down into the minutiae of detail, and I don't necessarily buy into that there's contractual details that should not. I think we're living in an environment where open and transparency is the whole way forward, and some of these contracts that we do have with PFI contracts that are there, some of them have maybe been going for a number of years. And what mechanism is there to actually review those contracts to ensure that we are getting value for money for them? Now, appreciate that next week we will probably be focusing in on what we deem to be maybe not great practice in some of PFI contracts, and some where there have been maybe glaring areas where we think that weren't right. That maybe is our interpretation. That we'll wait to see how that comes forward, whether that's what it bears out. I'm wondering, is there a mechanism to ensure that we are continuing to get value for money from contracts where there are buildings which are maybe not necessarily being used for the purpose they were, and as a consequence there's not maybe the same detail required within those contracts? Has those adjustments been made to ensure that the public purse is not paying for something they don't necessarily need? Or is there flexibility within the contract to allow that to happen? Because sometimes, if I was the private sector delivering some of these projects, I would be quite happy to be sure that the contract was not written in a way where there was going to be wriggle room, and whether they were occupying the building or not, I'm going to receive the money for the next 25 years, and at the end of that term, whether it comes back to me or goes back to the public purse is another point. But at that point, and that's just by the way, and maybe if you can go into that point at the start.
But I think the whole issue of effective contract management is a very important one because of the length of the agreements that there are under PFI. And in this respect, the key responsibility for contract management lies with the accountable department, which owns the contract and has signed the contract. And they would be responsible for that review of the contract and for ensuring they continue to get value for money. They're best placed. They know the area. They know the sector they're in. They know the contract was negotiated. However, there are important sources of advice to departments, and that would be provided through the Strategic Investment Board. And as part of the learning that has been built into this process over time, the Strategic Investment Board have developed a standard operating contract, which is applied to all PFI contracts. There's also a gateway process that all departments go through before they carry on through the contract to make sure that they're ready, they've got the proper project management and skills to be able to take it forward. In relation to the standard contract I referred to, what's sometimes called SOPSNI, there is built within that a 5-year review of the soft services that are provided within the contract, and there's an opportunity there, if circumstances change or costs change, for there to be a review of the contract. However, we do recognise that there's more can be done in this area, the asset management unit have already been working with some departments, and there's an example in the report of some work that was done with Invest NI in terms of a review of the contract. So some work has already been ongoing there. The report makes a recommendation that SIB and OFM DFM should work with departments to provide that sort of common approach so that departments can review their contracts, and that's one that where the First Minister and Deputy First Minister have accepted that recommendation, have written to the SIB asking them to work with departments in this area to provide that consistent support and guidance in taking forward the review of contracts. So that's one that SIB will be taking forward.
Well, I appreciate your openness on that point. Now, you did allude to the fact that there was included a 5-year review on every contract. And that 5-year review should be quite detailed, because we all have leases and properties one way or the other, and we know that people sometimes miss their negotiating date, and as a consequence of missing your negotiating date, you're held over a barrel for it. And I'm wondering, is the eye, or are those reviews happening on time, and do they always deliver savings?
I think I'll hand over the detail on this if you don't mind, to Brett here from the SIB, because he will have that detailed knowledge on that. But
yeah, because I do appreciate that you alluded to the fact that through OFM, DFM, and the Minister, the First Minister and Deputy First Minister have both sent through direction for the help to be given. Do the departments have the expertise within their departments to actually, what way should I put it, be able to negotiate against what are some very sharp practices within the private sector to ensure that they're getting a very good deal and the public sector aren't necessarily getting as good a deal?
As Marcus said, the responsibility for managing contracts on a day-to-day basis lies with the department, and they wouldn't wait for 5 years if there was a problem with a contract. They would step in and deal with any issues that arose as they arose. However, at the 5-year point, the contracts will always allow for a periodic review and benchmarking of services to ensure that the public purse is getting what it's paid for in terms of the best deal available at that time. Now, in carrying out that work, individual departments can call upon the Central Procurement Directorate to provide them with day-to-day advice on contract management issues. What the report has suggested is that in addition to that regime, the Strategic Investment Board should work with departments to provide specialist support for more structured and detailed reviews, which would bring in legal, technical and financial experts to work with departments to determine whether there are any further opportunities for savings that go beyond the scope of those periodic 5-year reviews. And I'd be happy to go through how that might be taken forward. The reviews that take place periodically do deliver savings. One of the most important ones of those was in one of the water PFIs, where what's known as a prudent operator review took place, and some £11 million of savings were delivered in that way by insisting that the operator performed in a particular way that benefited the public to the utmost extent.
Was that in one contract or many?
That was on, Mike would have the detail on this, but I believe it was 2 contracts.
So on 2 contracts there was £11 million of overcharging potentially could have been there had it not been renegotiated?
Certainly, if the people managing the contract hadn't taken that action, then it would have been lost. But the point I'm trying to make is that the contract managers are alive to this. You also asked about whether we thought the operating departments had the skills, knowledge and experience necessary to manage these contracts properly. That assessment is made at the point before the contract is actually signed, when projects will go through a gateway review, one element of which is to assess the department's capacity and capability in this specific field. And unless that can be demonstrated, then the project won't go forward.
I appreciate
Well, I want to bring in Sean just for a minute.
Yeah, that's okay.
Right.
It's just a small point, but I think a very important point. These reviews, you mentioned review very often, but very few of these reviews were full contract reviews. And as it says on page 23 of this report, you know, not alone that, but also very frequently savings were identified, but they weren't quantified. So, you know, there's a difference between a review and a full contract review, I think, which is very, very important. There was little significant changes to services or assets since the contract was signed. So, could you please identify, you know, the difference between this review and a full? Why was there so few full contract reviews?
I can't speak for departments because I simply don't know the arrangements that they have entered into or the details of the reviews that they have carried out. The survey that was carried out by the Audit Office provides the data to which I think you're referring, and what OFM DFM has done since then is to write out to all the departments that contributed to that survey in order better to understand those issues which they have raised, and that process is ongoing at the moment, taking the data and collating it, and those are the very issues that we'll be exploring with them.
Right, before going back to Paul again, I'm sure members would be keen to know what has happened since this issue was first ventilated in 2008. And we hear today of the role perhaps of the Strategic Investment Board, but even at this stage you're only communicating with some departments. I mean, have you been sitting on your hands daydreaming for the last 6 years what has been happening?
No. The Audit Office raised the possibility of SIB being asked to work in this area.
Did you take it seriously?
Prior to that, we were not asked to work in this area, and as I'm sure you're aware, SIB only works where it is invited to by departments. So we were not given this responsibility. The responsibility, as Mark and I set out earlier, rests with departments in the first instance, and they are able to call upon specialist support from Central Procurement Directorate on contract management issues when they want to. So this is a new initiative suggested by the Audit Office that SIB should become involved. I can talk you now through, if you find it useful, what SIB has done since that has been suggested, and explain a little bit about how we propose to take this forward.
Go back to Paul, because, sorry, go ahead.
It's in relation to the contracts, and I for one, haven't been involved in many contracts in the past, and how you can be caught up in quite a bit of detail and missing specific points. It's the transparency of the whole process, and when it is public money, I think there's a necessity for us to be across the detail of all of the detail, and I'm not always sure, and I'm going to ask, it's probably the wrong question to ask, but I'll ask it anyway. Do we believe that we have got value for money from the PFI or the PPP contracts that we have went forward with, or whatever revenue-funded investment, whatever term you want to use for it? Do we believe we've got value for money for that, or could we have made treasury borrowings and delivered those projects and got better value for the public person through that mechanism, as opposed to going down the route of some people, I believe, getting very wealthy on the back of the public purse, delivering buildings which the public are sold into for generations?
Could I maybe just answer that in the first instance? I mean, the key aspect here for every single project, whether it's PFI or whether it's conventional procurement, is that all of them have to have a business case. And in those that are thinking of going down the PFI route, they must specifically include within that the option of conventional procurement. And that business case will look at the whole life costs, will look at the services that are being provided, whether they're fit for purpose, and we'll look at the economic and social benefits. And based on that assessment, we'll determine whether or not the project is value for money. Only those projects which are value for money are signed off by the departmental minister, signed off by DFP, are then able to go forward. So the guarantee around these projects being value for money really relates to the business case process.
I appreciate it. It's not so. It's a question I wanted to get a wee bit of clearance on, because, or guidance on, because if I were delivering something, I would be expecting to get something out of it. And if the business case stacked up that it worked, you need the building, and primarily these are for capital projects, so you're going to need the building, so you've made the business case that you need that. The fact is, it's the mechanism for delivery of the hardware and maybe the maintenance of that during its life. If a private contractor can make money out of that, still make money out of that, why can the public sector not do the same and instead of making money out of it, make savings because they're not having to pay the same amount? Now, I look at it just solely as a businessman. That would be my attitude to it. And I would be very hard-nosed in relation to trying to do a deal that was going to give me the best deal. And sometimes I think some of these have given opportunities to some people to actually do very well. And we might look at some of those later on to see where the same names seem to appear in various different ways. And have you ever looked across all of the 35 or how many projects there are and see, is there a common thread through many of those where the same individuals, either through a shelf company that has been formed or whatever, because a number of them actually form maybe 3 or 4 different companies for delivering of the same thing, all of which have directors, some of the same names appear right through them, and sometimes the same contractors are used to deliver on many of them. Have you looked across that to see the commonalities where they are and how are we being hoodwinked by some very shrewd individuals in the private sector?
Well, perhaps I'll pick up the first part of the question and pick up the second part of the question. But in relation to the first part of the question, what we have to remind ourselves is that while, of course, there's a profit element in a PFI contract, who would undertake a contract if there wasn't a profit element in it? The key thing is that there has to be a benefit both to those who are actually undertaking the contract and those who are receiving the outcome of that contract. So it has to be a contract that works for both the public sector and the private sector. The second point would be that there has to be, if we didn't use the private PFI, the other route's conventional. Conventional still involves a profit for the capital build, otherwise, again, the contractor wouldn't build, so there's a profit in there, and then there's a cost in actually running the service over the 25 to 30 years, which would have to come from the public sector. So we have to compare all the costs on one side against all the costs on the other, and that is done explicitly in the business case for the comparison between the PFI and between the conventional operator, and it looks at then what is the best value to the public, taking account of the full cost, the whole life cost for both of those approaches over that period of time. And if it doesn't demonstrate that the PFI is the most effective route, then the PFI can't be substantiated. So that comparison has been tested, and I say it is important in all of these that we don't get focused too much on one aspect of the private element and ignore some of the other costs that occur in a different route. We need to compare like with like, and that's what the business case seeks to do. But Brett, maybe you could pick up on the extent to which there are companies which have expertise in this area and have been successful in contracts.
Just before Brett comes in on that, it has opened up another question within my own mind, and it's in relation to public value for money. And I'm not always so sure that we do have the expertise to say that we are getting value for money. If we go out for tender, I'm just going to use an example, for an office block, for accommodation for office block, and we get an estimate in, and it's going to come in and say it's £5 million, and you then say, well, look, we might look at this under a PFI project and come back, and a private developer can deliver the same building, but it's only costing him £3 million. And you sit back and say, well, why is there an extra £2 million factored in whenever it was tendered under a public procurement procedure? That could make the difference between a project being viable or not viable, and it could make the decision of not going down this route a lot easier. I'm not always so sure that we're getting value for money for the public purse. We've always heard that if it's a council or whatever delivering a project, well, somebody else could have done that for half the price. I've heard that many, many times, and you sit back and say, are we always getting that value for those contracts whenever we do go out to look at the comparison? Are we getting the same? Is it like for like, or is it, yes, a private sector guy can do it for half the price?
Yeah, well, I think you're asking there's two aspects to that question. I mean, one is, are we getting better value for money by the route that we choose.
Yes.
And in terms of the business case, in comparing the different routes, will identify that one route is better value than another route. So, in the case of the route that's chosen, it should be the better of the value of the routes that are there. But I think you're going beyond that to ask another question, which is, in whatever route we pick, are we getting the best possible value
Yes,
for money? And that's a more difficult question to answer, and I think I'll let Brett come in and give some perspectives on that. But I mean, I think the fact that we have been developing the contracts, the fact that we have been building in aspects here, for example, where there are excess profits, that there will be profit sharing, the fact that we have built in 5-year reviews of the contracts, all of that learning is being built into the process and is therefore being made available to departments as they take forward further PFI projects. So I think we are moving toward, can we say every project is best value? I think it's a very difficult thing to say. Can we say we're getting the best of those offers before us? Yes. And can we say we're getting better? Well, the process is certainly improving. I don't know, Brad, if you have anything else you want to add to that?
I think the key issue here is the competitive nature of the procurements, whether they're conventional or PFI. There is a competitive element, and it is that drives out value. If the public sector were going out without that competitive element, then I think your point would be absolutely right. There would be no way of demonstrating that the office block you referred to was being built at the most competitive price. But because there are numbers of bidders who are competing for the business, then that competition drives out value.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Brett, I'm not sure, maybe I cut you off earlier when you were perhaps going on to explain this new interaction with the Strategic Investment Board. Was there something more you wanted to say about that?
Well, Chairman, I offered to explain the actions that have been taken in response to the recommendation in the Audit Office report that SIB, with DFP and the OFM, DFM, should look at a programme of structured reviews of operational PFIs.
Okay. But it's intriguing that the inspiration for that wasn't present within the department. I mean, you're not washing machines that need programmed. Surely somebody should have seen that without prompt from the Audit Office.
I should say that as Mark said it earlier, and I reiterated, responsibility for contract management for PFIs rests with departments, and
Yes.
it's for them to assess the quality of that management, whether they need additional help from CPD or from anyone else. They would, I believe, not welcome interference in that, because they are accountable to their committees and to this committee for the management of those contracts. What the Audit Office has suggested is that if departments thought it useful, they could come and work with us to carry those out, and we have taken action to make sure that we're in a position to do that.
Okay. But I think the concern might be among members that, you know, surely we don't have to wait for another Audit Office report for future inspiration on how these things should be dealt with in an open and transparent way, where the taxpayer continues to get best value for money.
I think the other point, Chair, we can maybe make in this is that the case study that's in the paper actually predates the NIO recommendation, the INI case study, and that was one where the asset management unit within SIB was actually working with the department at the department's request to look at the contract. So this service was available, and in some instances was being taken up. I think what we're saying now is that in light of the recommendation of the Audit Office, there will be a more coordinated approach to this. That the availability of this advice will be extended and will be publicised, and the department will be encouraged to take it up. But Brett's quite right. At the end of the day, it's departments are accountable. It's them that have to demonstrate they're getting best out of the contracts, best value, and SIB and OFM, DFM can make these services available, and we will be making them available in response to the NIO recommendation.
Thank you. And now move on to Alex Easton. Alex.
Thank you. There appears to be a focus on getting the deal done for PFIs and then hoping that they run their course smoothly over the next 25 to 30 years, rather than squeeze every penny out of the contract. In 2011, HM Treasury issued a draft best practice guidance with 4 potential areas to achieve savings. Why did DFP not circulate this draft best practice guide from HM Treasury to everybody?
Well, I mean, in devolution, Treasury guidance doesn't directly apply to Northern Ireland, but this is a devolved matter now. So we made the guidance available. It was included as part of the Green Book assessment arrangements. So it was accessible to departments, but Treasury guidance is that just that. It's advisory. It's guidance. It's not.
I know, but is it not
directive.
good advice?
It's good advice, yes.
So it should have been passed on to other people.
But it was passed on. It was,
It was made available to all departments through the Northern Ireland Guide on Economic Appraisal and Advice on the What's New page, so all finance directors would have been made aware of it. The other important thing to know is that Treasury guidance actually changed next year, and in December 2012, Treasury actually fundamentally changed the PFI appraisal guidance, and DFP issued notes to departments and actually put forward its own new appraisal processes.
So the HMS Treasury guidance has now been passed on to all departments.
That guidance was passed on to all departments at that point in time, but it's no longer relevant. In fact, at 20th of December 2012, the Treasury actually indicated that they would shortly be circulating new PFA guidance on what's called their VFM model, quantitative model. They said it would be out in early 2013. It still hasn't been produced. So actually it's the DFP guidance that determines PFI and affordability judgments in NI departments.
Okay, so in the context of recent drives for efficiency savings and public spending, can you tell me why there's been a lack of progress in applying these guidance? I know they don't apply here, but you've acknowledged already that they're good. So why haven't we applied them here? And are we looking for those savings?
Sorry, efficiencies in terms of PFI contracts, or?
Yeah.
Well, as Mark and Brett have already indicated, there is already an ongoing process of driving out efficiencies in PFI contracts. For example, the work that the Asset Management Unit are already doing in some departments is generating savings. You know, you're aware of the Invest NI, the Bedford Street development, but there are a number of other projects underway as part of the Executive's Asset Management Strategy, which will drive out those efficiencies.
Yeah, it's underway now, but how long have some of these PFIs been going on for, and this hasn't been going on?
I mean, there are a number of processes we're talking about. I mean, there is an opportunity to benchmark the costs of the soft services that go with PFI contracts as part of the ongoing process of contract management, and that would happen naturally anyway.
Okay. And has there been any guidance issued by yourselves on PFIs?
Recent guidance.
The most recent guidance would be the 20th December 2012, which basically was setting aside Treasury's guidance.
Oh, right, so you are using the Treasury guidance?
No, setting aside Treasury's guidance.
Right, okay.
We're basically going back to standard Green Book appraisal process.
So before that, OFM, DFM and DFP didn't issue guidance on it?
There was regular guidance issued?
There was?
Yeah.
Right, okay, okay. HMS Treasury created a programme team for PFI projects on the potential of 1.5 billion savings. Yeah? Okay. Why did we not do the same, and how much could we potentially save if we did?
Hypothetical question, how much could we save? I'm not sure I can answer that question of that nature. I mean, there is, again, as we've said, the contract management responsibility lies with departments. They let the contracts, they entered into them, they manage them, they have the expertise on the management of those contracts. There are arrangements to allow them to review the contracts at regular intervals. They can draw on advice from us, from CPD, from SIB as part of that process. So there are processes in place to allow them to review contracts. And you know, there may be more we could do.
The audit office estimates that there could be £12.5 million worth of savings.
Right.
The audit office estimated.
By factoring down from the overall size of UK,
Yeah.
possibly.
No, I think it's on the £253 million pay out of our budget and the 5% calculation.
Right. It's the 250
Million per
million.
year.
Well, that's the unitary costs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point made earlier is the important point. I mean, we have a budget annually of over 10 billion and 1.4 billion of capital. So that 250 million is 2.5%, 2.8% of total spend. It's a relatively small amount. And yes, as I think Mark said, if you roll it up over 30 years, it sounds like a lot, 700 billion. But if you roll up the total budget over 30 years, it's 300 billion. It's still the same percentage, no matter whether it's 1 year or 30 years. So it is an important point. But we are buying services. We're not just buying a building. We're buying the services that support those buildings as part of the provision of a PFI contract. And it would cost us money to run those services if we paid for them ourselves. The point I think you were making, Mr. Girvan. If you employ the cleaners, you employ the cooks, you employ all the security guards yourself, that is a cost. Quite often public sector costs seem to be rather higher than the private sector can buy the same service for, and that's one of the areas where you do make savings. And I think we haven't said anything yet about the positives in this. PFI and RRI as mechanisms for funding projects do allow accelerated investment in the capital infrastructure in Northern Ireland, which everybody thinks is a good thing. It's good to have better roads, better housing, better education facilities, better hospitals. And this is a way of buying that investment and paying for it over a period of 30 years. So, as Mark said, it has to be justified in value for money. We're not just throwing money down the drain. But it is a way of getting investment. It's also a way of locking private sector management expertise into public sector contracts. And there's a general recognition that the private sector manage things quite well. They tend to deliver projects on time and to budget. They are locked into contracts that require them to maintain buildings over their life, so they have an incentive to do good building works in the first place, rather than walk away from it once they've built in a problem. So there are a lot of positives, and it does allow us to reform public services by providing better facilities than might otherwise be available. So we haven't said much about the positives. There are positives, and I think they're worth emphasising.
Yeah, the affordability aspect is actually critical. If you think back, for example, 10 years ago, the executive was faced with infraction charges on EU directives and wastewater. 2 water PPPs, Alpha and Amigo, cost over £1 billion of investment. The executive didn't have £1 billion of conventional capital to deliver those projects. So significant, the avoidance of infraction fines and the fact that there wasn't conventional capital DEL showed the significant affordability benefits of pursuing those 2 PPPs.
Maybe just 2 seconds, Alec. I'm not sure of. Is there some confusion about whether there might be £12.5 million saved or not? The audit office estimate. It's an estimate. I was going to call in Kieran maybe to explain for the record how you estimated that.
We don't care how much can be saved. Analysis of these, but
yes.
A very crude read. I think an important point is witnesses the responsibility of individual departments to manage projects and to seek out savings. But we only have 39 projects right across the system, and they're thinly spread. So if a department has only 1 or 2 projects, it will not always have the necessary negotiating skills or expertise. So that's the reason why I think we called for a central look at this. And but until all that's done, it's not clear just how much savings would materialise. And some savings have materialised. Clearly, the Invest NI is a good example of that. The important point, I think, is that the slide rule is put under all of these, and the best negotiating skills applied.
Sure, I think we may agree with the point about benchmarking. I think the difficulty for us is that to do Northern Ireland specific benchmarking is quite difficult. There are, as the CNIG says, relatively few local projects, and what we need to do is draw on expertise from across the UK and make it wider if possible, to give us expert advice on the areas, the fruitful areas for scrutiny, and that is done. We buy in consultancy.
Okay, Alex, are you?
Yeah, a few more questions.
Sure.
Across the 39 PFI projects in Northern Ireland, there was a questionnaire conducted. One department didn't respond. Do you know which department that was?
DOE.
Yeah,
DOE.
Is there any reason for that? No, you don't know?
Audit Office survey, wasn't
DOE is not a big capital spending department, really, I must say. Maybe that's why they don't, I don't know.
I was just curious as to why they didn't. Okay, in the questionnaire, I found that the reviews were not carried out in line with the HMS Treasury's best practice guidance, which you sort of semi-ignored. Why not? And were savings identified were not quantified, and why was that in the review?
I think, again, that will come to individual departments to answer because they are responsible for managing those projects. I mean, what we can say in the broadest sense is that there's some 25 of the PPP projects have completed a review of some sort, and 6 are in the process of drafting a review. Now, some of these are PPEs, some of them are audit reviews. There are reviews ongoing. But it would be helpful if there was more consistency around the reviews which are undertaken. Okay, and just my last question: of the 39 PFI projects across Northern Ireland, was there any clauses in the contract to have a review of the project lists in the contract for either the construction costs or the service costs? So out of them all, was it built into the contract that there would be a review of costs on either? Well, within the standard contract, which is applied to these projects, there's a 5-year review built into the provision of the soft services, and that is conducted on a
That's the service
basis.
cost?
That's the service cost, yes, in terms of maintenance, cleaning, catering, and so forth.
Okay, but not construction costs?
The construction costs
would already been met.
Well, they would be an element within the unitary charge alongside the soft services. They would all go to make that single unitary charge, and all elements of the costs are rolled up into that.
So were they not reviewed?
I'm not quite sure that I follow what you mean by review in that context.
Well, you've got the PFI project, so you've got the capital cost to build it, and then you've got the services costs. So we've established that there's a review built in for the services costs, which we agree on. Is there any type of review ever built into the contracts for the capital end to make sure that we're getting the best value for money within that section?
Well, the contract will be at a fixed price. So it is in the interests of the contractor to deliver within that price, because obviously if he doesn't, then he will lose out, and the public sector is therefore insulated against the risk of cost overrun in that case, because even if the contractor pays more for the asset, then they won't get paid anymore.
Okay. I'm not quite finished, nearly finished. So have we a guarantee of the 39 PFIs? There are reviews built into each and every one of those 39 contracts?
Yes.
Absolutely?
Yes.
Right, okay, that's me. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Maybe just to sort of recap on this, and I'm going to direct this question to Stephen, because I understand, Stephen, you're at a stage in your life where you will be philosophising about I think the wonderful career you've had. Could you explain to us what the Golden Rule was and how relevant it still is?
The Golden Rule?
Yes. I have it here somewhere.
Treasuries, that's treasuries.
I'm sorry for springing this on you.
Sorry, you mean you're talking about Gordon Brown?
Yeah.
And that,
Yes.
yes.
Yes. Can I just read it for you?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. The Golden Rule,
That
as
was
it
Golden Rule.
pertains to government spending, stipulates that a government will borrow to invest, not to finance existing spending. In other words, the government should borrow money only to fund investments that will benefit future generations, and current spending must be covered by existing taxes. And, you probably know this anyway, the term originates from ancient writings including the New Testament, the Talmud, the Quran. Each has a story that teaches the Golden Rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. In fiscal policy, the Golden Rule seeks to protect future generations from debt by limiting borrowing money to investments and not to indebt future generations for the benefit of current generations.
Yes, it's philosophy and economic policy at the same time. Yeah, I mean that was Gordon Brown's golden rule when he was Chancellor, and it was maintained for quite a long time. I think I'm not sure even Mr. Brown maintained it to the end of his career.
No.
But in the main, what we're talking here about is investment for the provision of assets to the Northern Ireland public. Whether it's office buildings or hospitals or schools or wastewater treatment works. Associated with those are operating costs, and they are charges that would fall on the Northern Ireland taxpayer, in fact the UK taxpayer anyway. So I think in the main our projects, all our projects have been in accordance probably with the Golden Rule. I can't think of one where we have borrowed for the financing of current expenditure. Under a PFI contract. Well, certainly not under a PFI contract at all. They are assets. We have purchased assets which will be of benefit throughout their lifetime to future generations as well as to us.
So you're happy that we followed the philosophy of Gordon Brown and
Yes.
didn't use PFIs to fund existing expenditure?
No.
All right.
Sorry, yes, I am happy. Sorry. Yes.
I'll take your word on that.
Yeah.
I'll move on to Sean.
Thanks, gentlemen. There's been quite a bit of reference to departments being held accountable and so on today. But if we take a particular case in mind, like Balmoral High School, which, as I understand, is not being used today for its original purpose, and we're still incurring costs, is that not a real waste of taxpayers' money? In that particular case, who held the Department of Education accountable?
Yeah, I mean, I think none of us can really speak for the Department of Education, though two of us worked on it before. I mean, I think no contract arrangement, whether it's conventional procurement or a PFI or any other version of it, will protect you from a wrong decision. If a decision is made to locate a school in a particular area where the catchment population will not support the long-term viability of that school, then that decision is wrong. And it doesn't matter how you buy the asset. It's still money that may well be wasted. As I understand, Balmoral has been used for. I mean, it's used for the regional training units. It was used as a decant for St Coleman's Primary School when their new building was being built. It's being used for another purpose now, as far as I understand
It's a special school. It's just moved into it, St John's.
So I think that asset that was a decision which may if you look at the pattern of schools, Dunmurry High School and the school on Blacks Road were a mile apart maybe. In two different education and library boards, it maybe wasn't the right decision to replace Balmoral High School or to build Balmoral High School in that location. But presumably somebody made the decision on the basis of an assessment of need at the time. In retrospect, it looks as if that was the wrong decision, but it would have been the wrong decision whether it was conventionally procured or procured through PFI.
Had DFP or DFM any role in holding the Department of Education accountable?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, I probably wasn't in DFP at the time. But the decision was justified on the basis of a business case done by the Belfast Education Library Board at the time, cleared by the department. It may even have been cleared by DFP. I'm not sure. Probably would have been large enough to have cleared it.
The DFP supply officer would have seen the business case, but it would have assessed the business case in terms of the methodologies were followed correctly. For example, in terms of identifying the preferred option to pursue.
But I mean, there's no point. I'm not trying to defend the decision that was made. I think building a control school in that location was probably not a very sensible thing to have done.
Just another point then on page 5 again. England and Scotland published details of how potential PFI contract savings, as well as realised savings, and you have mentioned, Mr. Pugh, over earlier attempts. Yes, we're a devolved authority and whatever, or a devolved area in that. But we seem to have no strategic programme coordinating the review of operation of PFI contracts across government. Would you like to comment on that?
I think, as my colleagues have said, the responsible bodies here are individual departments. DFP has a role, obviously, in looking at the overall management of public spending and in looking at larger projects that require business case approval cleared through DFP. So we will do that. The system is in place through us, the SIB and CPD, try and provide advice to departments in managing contracts to try and achieve efficiency as part of that process. Could it be more coordinated? Probably, yes.
But there's really nothing in...
There's no requirement.
There's nothing there to prevent departments doing solar runs and having another Balmoral arise in some other situation.
Well, no, I wouldn't say that. I mean, I think that is a different issue. That's an issue about the validity of the original decision to have the resource available. And, whether to build a hospital or not build a hospital, build a school, not build a school, there is a decision point there. Later on, once you've got it, the question is what do you do with it? I mean, and as Mark was saying, that asset in Balmoral has right through been used as part of the regional training unit. It was used as a decant facility for a primary school that needed rebuilt, and it's now being used for special education. So, I mean, if you've got an asset, it's sensible to try and make the best use of it, and that is a matter for the owner of the asset, really. I don't know the detail of that well enough to be able to comment on it specifically, but at least the asset is being used now.
And the other strategic point to bear in mind is that when projects of that nature come forward, they go as a standing item to ministers in the budget review group. So they, for example, will get a list and an update from Brett and myself on projects of that nature and how they're progressing.
Okay, thank you. There's been some talk of actual savings to date. Can you give us any more information on what savings are being achieved and how we're now achieving better value for money?
Mark?
Even as a result of this report.
Well, I mean, the report identifies a number of instances. It identifies the I&I example, and it also points to a number of other reviews. But I think we would accept that the extent of savings that have been driven out through reviews could be improved, and that's why the First Minister has written to First and Deputy First Minister have written to the SIB, asking that they make available that expertise to departments to try and coordinate advice and support to departments in undertaking a review of contracts. We recognise that there's more that could be done in that whole area, but you may know more about what has been done to date. I think that's an important decision that's been made by the First and Deputy First in terms of that coordinated response to this recommendation.
I do acknowledge that I&I have challenged their commitment, and it's been done there. Is that good practice been disseminated across departments?
Well, we are certainly carrying on with that programme. And the Finance Minister has recently indicated that he is making available some £40 million of capital and £4.5 million of revenue in order to enable departments to pursue initiatives such as the Invest NI project in order to deliver further savings both to the revenue budget through such initiatives where those changes and those initiatives would deliver value for money. And that is a piece of work which is ongoing within SIB at the moment.
Maybe I should just say on that point, we've talked about PFI and PPP and so on here. I mean, there are lots of long-term commitments that government entered into, leasehold arrangements, for example, on renting office buildings. And we have had a policy for some time now of seeking to minimise our reliance on leasehold buildings and moving into property which we own, or as Brett says, invest in, or to buy out leases, and find more effective ways of using our current resources in order to provide the facilities that we need. So that process is going on. We could actually provide you, I haven't got them here, but we could provide you with figures on how much we think we have saved in terms of concentrating the public sector estate into owned buildings rather than leased buildings, and maximising the use of space within existing buildings rather than expand into new premises. We can provide the committee with some information on that if you'd like.
And just going back to my earlier point about reviews, are all reviews now full contract views where people have to identify savings and quantify them?
Well, there's a requirement within the overall processes that there would be post-project evaluations. I mentioned the figures that we have at the moment for the range of reviews that have been done. Where there are post-project evaluations done, they are made available to DFP. They come back as a matter of course to DFP, and they're made available to the individual department, so that we get that loop around in terms of the learning from that individual project. And where there are wider lessons to be learned, that can be disseminated through the normal processes in DFP.
And just finally, do you keep a sharp eye what's happening in England and Scotland in terms of how they fund?
Since the publication of the Audit Office report, we have met with the Ministry of Defence, Department of Transport, Scottish Futures Trust, DEFRA, DCLG, Ministry of Justice and Home Office to learn from their experience of carrying out similar reviews. And I have a list of key lessons that we've derived from their experience, which we will certainly be applying when we take forward this initiative.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Move on to Chris.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, guys, for the answers to date. Stephen, just to come back actually to the point you picked up on, and I think that list of the long-term commitments, I think you'd said in the savings that could be made could be very useful for the committee to have. But just, I know in paragraph 5 of the executive summary in the Audit Office report indicates that the findings and recommendations can be applied equally across a whole range of long-term commitments from the government. You know, you touched upon one of these, the leased buildings, for example. Can you give us a flavour of what some of these long-term commitments would be, you know, and how they would be funded, and perhaps where the savings could be made?
Yeah, I mean, I think the leased buildings is one of the most obvious, and probably one of the largest, because a fair part of our estate is leased from private landlords. We had a programme some time ago to try and outsource the public sector estate and then lease it back with enhanced space utilisation. So that went the way of all flesh at one point, because the companies involved merged, and there was a lot of complications about it. But anyway, that went away. As you might appreciate, governments tend to have higher priorities for capital investment than office buildings for civil servants and public servants. So we're usually at the back end of the queue and looking for capital money to refurbish or rationalise our estate. What we've been trying to do is to do that on a basis when we can find money, or when we can establish an invest to save argument for a particular rationalisation process, we will do it. I'll give you an example in my own department. It's actually current and quite relevant. LPS, Land Property Services, is scattered in Belfast over a number of headquarters buildings. It's in Lincoln buildings where the Land Registry are. It's in Queen's Court, where the Valuation Directorate and some of the Revenue and Benefits side are. It's in College Street, and it's in what's the fourth one? I'll come back to me in a second. They are rationalising into a single headquarters building down at Lanyon Place, which will do a number of things. It'll be up to refurbished to modern standards, so much more intense. Colby House is the fourth one. Much more intense utilisation of space. It will get the 4 directorates together, the key staff and the headquarters directors together in one building, so enable the organisation to have a more easy access to one another, to the various components, and develop a more corporate culture by being in one building. And that is generating real savings through the vacation of other premises, sometimes directly, sometimes by allowing other staff to move into a vacated building and then vacate another one. So there's a chain of moves. So we're doing that, and Brett's mentioned the money that my minister is making available to allow those sorts of things to happen, and analogous arrangements that will allow you to generate revenue savings by investing some capital and rationalising the facilities that we have. So those sorts of things are in a sense, part of the normal day-to-day business of departments.
And is the strategic vision shared between OFM, DFM, DFP? Friction there in the system, and how has that worked out?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we work very closely together, and I mean, we are engaged all the time. The asset management strategy was a joint production between ourselves and SIB, and the arrangements that are in place to follow that up and build on it are joint arrangements between DFP and OFM, DFM, SIB. So I think I'm pretty satisfied that is working well. Well, it has started well and will continue to work well, and it is being done on a cooperative and joint basis. Maybe Brett wants to comment.
No, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
That's all right.
All right.
Just
Bring Paul back
a supplementary onto the back of that question, and I do understand the rationale behind moving out of 4 separate buildings all over the place. Now, that rationale would stack up if we are not entering into a PFI contract to move into one in Lanyon Place, and it's maybe down to the detail of the case, the 4 properties that we have, some of which are in fairly prominent sites in Belfast, what is actually happening with those buildings to make sure that they deliver. And this is the whole point. You might well be getting a PFI contract, which makes sense, but whenever you take 4 buildings, what is happening with the 4 properties that are left?
Right, okay. Well, in this case, it isn't a PFI contract. This was a NAMA sale, so we
that's fine.
acquired the premises. Some of them we own. Lincoln Buildings is leased.
Yeah.
Colby House we own on Strambillis and could be sold, but will actually provide a valuable resource possibly for some of our other staff whom we can move out of leased accommodation in Colby and save money as part of that process. Queen's Court is owned. And we'll need to retain Queen's Court for some of our staff. And College Street is being used by another department who will move staff out of a leased building into College Street, which we own as well. So the whole thing stacks up as a business case and does generate benefits overall for the system. So we will get the corporate benefits for LPS of getting the headquarters staff for the first time ever into a single building. And LPS was constructed in a 2-phase process in 2007 and 2008. It's always been scattered over a number of directorates. It needs to be more integrated, and we will get that starting this month.
Totally buy in.
It is a well argued and
totally buy into that one. It's not an issue. It was just because we might be looking at others where they have not necessarily been so joined up in their approach in relation to the use of the building that they're in, but that's an argument for another day. But to go back on, John alluded to something earlier about the golden rule, and we actually used this vehicle for access to funds to deal with the equal pay. And I know we alluded to that it's really used to deliver assets, and I'm wondering how you make the argument or square the circle on this matter in relation to making borrowings to do an equal pay settlement, which probably couldn't have been delivered maybe through ordinary revenue that we had.
Yeah, I mean, I think the 2 things. This was approved by the Treasury and by the Prime Minister, in fact, in this case. It was, yeah.
So it's a unique one.
Well, no, it's actually it's a common one.
No, it's a common one because the capitalisation of those sorts of costs is something that happens pretty regularly in local government, particularly. So it wasn't a one-off for us. It was the capitalisation of a cost, which would have been a real pressure on us otherwise. So it didn't take us outside. It was capitalised, maybe slightly unusual capital expenditure, but capitalised nonetheless.
It doesn't fit with the box that I have for what is a capital.
Yeah, but I mean, it in terms of local authorities, RRI operates.
I'm not saying it hadn't to be dealt with. It
No.
had to be dealt with, and the money had to be set up to deal with it.
Yeah, when RRI operates on the basis of broad comparability with local government prudential borrowing arrangements, and local government can borrow as it can, nationally as well as it can here to invest, and does often. And this is one of those things that is allowed to be capitalised for, and we couldn't have gone much higher than the Prime Minister to get agreement to it. So
can I ask, in relation to the capitalisation of that project, there will be interest being charged on that borrowings over the period of time for it? Was that factored in as value for money?
It should have been. The borrowing rate's around about 3.3%.
3.3%,
which is
Okay,
a good deal
so
lower
it
than.
is
you're not getting better anywhere else.
No, we won't.
competitive. So this was actually Treasury borrowing then?
This is National Loan Fund borrowing, yeah.
Yeah, that's okay.
Gentlemen, I have a couple of questions here. We're coming near the end, you'll be pleased to know. While recognising that reinvestment and reform initiative is an important driver for the delivery of investment strategy, it is concerning that the estimated cost of borrowing is continuing to increase and the cost of interest is estimated to be 1.3 billion. In view of this, what assessment has been made of the affordability of the long-term spending implications of reinvestment and reform borrowing? As already been alluded to by other members, can we afford this?
The answer is yes. I mean, it amounts to the interest. Sorry, the payments amount to about 0.5% of.
That's in total 100 million in total.
In total, yeah. And that's both interest and
capital repayment. Yeah. And the capital repayment doesn't score against the DAO.
Yeah, and I think one of the points we haven't mentioned yet is that the executive is considering a borrowing strategy, and which would set out all of these things. I mean, we do give affirmative information on the RRI in the budget papers, so it's available. Yeah. The costs, the interest payments, all the rest of it are set out, so they are already fairly transparently available to people. But we think it would be sensible to have a borrowing strategy, and the executive is considering it. And as part of that process, we'll look at how the long-term position can best be portrayed or developed.
Well, perhaps since we were debating the budget yesterday, it would seem appropriate to ask a question that relates to it. The budget sets the context and capital expenditure provision for investment strategy, but what analysis is done of the affordability of future borrowings and anticipated reinvestment and reform initiative commitments in a manner that is subject to the scrutiny of the Assembly?
Yeah, I mean, I think those things are dealt with. I mean, there is a ceiling on RRI borrowing of £3 billion.
At the minute, the aggregate ceiling is £3 billion, but as Stephen mentioned, there is a paper that the executive are currently considering on the borrowing strategy moving forward and what they may and may not want to do in terms of future borrowing requirements to fund capital projects.
Well, maybe final question: why is there no formal borrowing strategy to underpin investment strategy?
Well, when the executive approved its 4-year budget back in March 2011, it did set out its borrowing intentions in the budget document, and they're detailed there with the interest repayments. It couldn't set out a strategy beyond 2015-16 because there wasn't a spending review for that period, so you had no affordability envelope to construct a strategy. But as I say, there is a paper currently with the executive which assesses questions such as when do we draw a line in terms of future borrowing, when does the reservicing of the debt become unaffordable. Those questions are currently in that paper that's with the executive.
Okay. Members, we have now... Yes, go ahead, Paul. We're just wrapping up.
Just before finishing on that point, it's just in relation to the 39 projects that we have, at the end of the term on all of those, the majority of those projects, how many of the assets are actually owned by the public sector at the end of that term, and how many will be owned by the delivery, the agent, or whoever provided them? The reason I'm asking that question is there a comparison between paying rent, primarily rent, and actually mortgage?
Mm-hmm. I mean, my understanding is that for most of the projects, I don't have the details and all, and for most of them, at the end of it, they would refer to the public sector ownership.
Now, members, anybody else questions to ask? Can we wrap up to this?
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Alex.
No, just wrap up.
Okay. Same question to Mr. Layberry and his colleagues and the CNAG. Is there anything you wish to add regarding the evidence we have just received? Gentlemen, before thanking you for your attendance before the committee, I think it would be remiss not to acknowledge that, Stephen, you're going towards retirement, and a better mortal than I, no doubt, will sum up your enormous contribution to the civil service. Can I say, over the years, as probably the longest serving member of this committee, you have always robustly defended your department, and I think that's a strong feature, and no doubt the Assembly has benefited a great deal from your wisdom, your inspiration, and indeed at times your stubbornness.
Thank you, Chairman. That's very kind.
Wish you all the best.
Yeah, and can I say to the member of the committee generally what I've said to you in our other discussions, that I mean it's been a privilege for me this last whatever it is now, since 2000, to have worked for a local assembly, and particularly the last year since 2007, since restoration. I mean, I spent most of my career working under direct administration, and it has been professionally and personally very satisfying to work for local politicians and to be accountable to an assembly and through the PAC, personally accountable to the Assembly. So, and thank you for, I've enjoyed my interactions with this committee and with the Finance and Personnel Committee and with the DOE Committee before that as well. So
I can say, Stephen, without hesitation on public record, that I've always enjoyed your robustness in defending your colleagues. And I think it's nice that we've had, I think, a very good hearing here, and it's nice to, for you, I think, to end on a high note. And with that, again, thank you, for coming. Next week we have another evidence session on the Belfast Metropolitan College public-private partnership element of this inquiry, and following that we may need to write to you seeking clarification on issues raised, and we will also be writing to you on issues raised today.
In the Bahamas.
All right. Members, for the remaining items of business, it's necessary that we move into closed session.
Okay.
Are members content that we now move to closed session? And